You say, I don't know how to do this. Well, so I'm confused. I don't know how to be a spiritual leader. Well, it's very simple. You start by following Christ. All right, so let's look at this then. What does that mean when you say, Wes, following Christ? Spiritual leadership by following Christ. There are three things. The first is you start in spiritual leadership by setting an example. That's the first and perhaps the most powerful form of leadership, is setting an example. Personal obedience. You see, so I'm looking to this man Jesus, and I'm starting to obey him, and therefore I am becoming an example for those who are seeing me. Do you see that? So without saying a word, I am already a leader. And men, in the home, that is absolutely true. But what does it mean to set an example? Here's a thought that the Lord gave me this week. Setting an example, personal obedience, it begins by pursuing Christ in the privacy of the mind. It doesn't start in the church building. It doesn't start in a prayer meeting. It doesn't start writing a book. It doesn't start reading a book. It starts here. You think about it, where is the Holy Spirit? The Holy Spirit is in your entire body. But just as your spirit is concentrated in your mind, in other words, your spirit is here, then the Holy Spirit is concentrating here. He is here in your mind when you think and when you pray and when you make decisions about what to do or not to do. You are doing it in the privacy of your mind. But it's pursuing Him in the mind. That's where you have to begin pursuing Him. So men, when you're making decisions about what to do and not do, remember this term is personal obedience. When you're trying to figure out what to do or not do, you're doing that in your mind. And so you're trying to follow Christ in your mind first. You're saying, what is He doing? What is He not doing? What does He want me to do? What does He not want me to do? And then you're trying to do it. But you have to start in your mind. And then it means to display righteous character to all people in all situations at all times. So I'm pursuing Christ in my mind. I'm trying to, as James said this morning, I'm trying to measure what I do by what He says. I'm trying to talk to Him, interact with Him, and experience Him in the privacy of my mind. And then I'm trying to go from there and live and display a righteous life to all people at all situations at all times. What I've noticed among men, especially men and fathers, is that sometimes what they do, they are one way when there are people around their family, when they're out somewhere, a church, restaurant, wherever else. But they are another way at home. And the children and the wife see the duality. They see the hypocrisy. They see that at home you're mean, you're a jerk, you're short with everybody. But when you get to church, you look like you're the best father in the world. You can't do that and lead your family. You have to. Remember, if you start in your mind, then you always know that Christ is in your mind. You always know that Christ is evaluating everything that you're doing in your mind. Then that will flow out into your life where you're still, I'm making the decision in my mind to be consistent with Christ, and therefore I'm always going to be the same person. You've got to be the same guy. Patient, loving, gentle, kind, strong, all the time. This not only is going to affect your family, but it'll also affect your evangelism. And then setting an example is fulfilling your duties and responsibilities. Those duties and responsibilities of your station, your office, or your calling. If you want people to follow you, if you want to be a leader, you have to do what you're supposed to do in your role. So this is why I talked first about the husband or the father working. Setting an example of a work ethic, setting an example of providing for and making sure the family's needs are met, because that is fulfilling the responsibility of the man. And so you are leading your children, you're leading your boys and your girls, you're leading your wife when you get up and you go work, when you put in those extra hours, when you get everything that is needed for the family. You're setting an example, you're fulfilling it. We've got to fulfill our duties and responsibilities first. If you're trying to tell people what to do, you're trying to tell your children what to do, tell your wife what to do, give them advice, give them some kind of leadership help, counsel, and you're not doing what you're supposed to do in your role, whatever role that is, whether it's in the church or even in the home as we're talking about, they're not going to follow you. So you have to begin spiritual leadership by personal obedience and setting an example. Secondly, spiritual leadership for men is investing in lives. It's investing in lives. It's living life beyond yourself. So here I've got a man. I'm following Christ in the privacy of my mind. I am trying to be a good example and obey and fulfill all my responsibilities. That's the basis. That's the bottom level of spiritual leadership. And then I'm going to invest in other people's lives. I'm going to look for opportunities to invest in them, love them, and care for those whom Christ places under my care or in my path. So now I have to begin to not just set that example with my actions, but now I have to go outside of myself and start to love and help and encourage and build up and strengthen other people. In my family, my children, my wife, I have to take those steps, those active steps. You notice this word actively is going to come up quite a bit. Let me give you an example here. Encouraging your children. Fathers, you have to be, I've seen far too much of fathers being not having any idea, not really paying attention to the mental, emotional, and spiritual condition of their wives and their children. They're aloof. They're distant. They're not paying attention. When you see your children discouraged, I had a situation where one of my children was in college, and I could tell the stress was getting to them, the stress of the classes, the stress of the grades, and I could see it. And I'm always in tune. I'm always paying close attention to the facial expressions of my children, to their countenance, their attitudes, whether they're happy, they're sad, bothered, concerned. And it's my job, when I see something that's not right, it's my job to step in and see what I can do to help in that situation. And when I saw this discouragement, I saw this worry, I could feel it. And so I went into their room and I knocked on the door. I said, hey, let's talk for a little bit. And I could tell something was wrong. And tell me what's going on. And I knew what it was, so I led the discussion. You're struggling with your classes? It's a lot, isn't it? And so I then began to talk to them and explain to them where they were in their life and say, hey, this is where you are now, but you're going to find that this is going to happen as you move ahead. And I said, don't let your value be tied up in your grades, because your value does not tie into your value is not tied to grades. And I love you no matter what you get. Christ loves you no matter what you get. You have to do the best that you can, put in all the work, and you're not always going to get A's. You're going to get B's and C's, and you're going to fail sometimes. You know, so this is the kind of, so I encouraged my child in that way. I lifted them up and invested in them when I see something. I wonder, men, have you done that recently for your wife? Have you done that recently for your children? Do you even know how they feel? Do you even know what their problems are, or their burdens are? How can you lead them if you're not paying attention? And then finally, addressing issues and making decisions. This is the third part. Now, this is what everybody thinks is leadership. They think making decisions is just, that's all leadership is. It's being the boss. Hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, go do this, go do that. We're going to go in this direction. Nah. If you're not doing these other things, the decision-making piece of it won't matter. What is this about? Actively addressing spiritual issues that arise in those Christ places under our charge or in our path. Under our charge or in our path. So under our charge would be children. If you're a deacon, then you have people that are under your charge. If you're a pastor, you have people under your charge. You know, so you have that. But you also have people God puts in your path. People you run into, other disciples that you talk to, friends of yours, family members. These are people that come into your path. actively addressing spiritual issues that arise, actively making leadership choices. Leadership at this level is about making a decision. A or B. Do we go this way? Do we go that way? That's really what this is. It's making decisions. Let me give you another example. Children, fear, and COVID. Children, fear, and COVID. I remember when this thing first hit, this COVID-19 thing, and everybody was freaking out. And businesses were closing, and people were being laid off, and all over social media, all over the internet. I mean, you couldn't not hear about it. And I could tell that my children were afraid. I could tell that they were talking about it at the dinner table. They were just seemed troubled. And in my home, and I encourage you men, this is something that you can do. We have a devotional every week. We normally do it on Saturday nights. We have a devotional, family devotional. And usually what we do, just to give you an idea, if you're looking to do this, you don't have to be some kind of super knowledgeable Bible scholar. What we normally do is we'll just pick a chapter in the Bible, something maybe they're interested in, something that I'm interested in. We'll just pick a chapter, we'll read it. And what we'll do is everybody's responsibility is to note something that they find interesting or that they have a question about. So we'll pray, we'll read the chapter, and then I'll say, who wants to go first? And so one of the children will say, I thought verse 15 was interesting. And I'll say, well, what did you find interesting about that? And what do you guys think? You just talk about it, okay? And then I lead. If there's something that needs to be addressed or taught, or if they're thinking, wrong about something, then I will lead them and say, hey, well, the way we need to think about this is like this. That's a form of leadership. But at any rate, we do that. So I called a special devotional. It was the middle of the week. I think it might have been a Tuesday or a Thursday. And I said, we're going to talk about this COVID thing. And I went to the Bible, and I went to the book of Psalms, and I found a psalm that told us to trust in God and not fear. And I read it, and I talked to him about it, and I told him we're not going to be afraid, and we talked about how God's power and God is going to protect us, and even if we do get sick, he has a purpose in that, and that we are not to be afraid. And it was like the air just went out of the fear balloon, But that's an example of leadership. So I'm actively addressing spiritual issues. It can be anything. It can be your children's friends or their language, or your wife, or you're always just addressing things and making decisions. Let me just point out again this word actively. This is a key, man. This is a key. You are responsible. You see, God is holding you responsible. He's not holding your wife responsible. He's not holding your children responsible. He's holding you responsible. So you have to be actively doing this. This means you're not sitting around and waiting for your wife to go, hey, honey, one of the kids is really having a hard time. You go talk to him. Certainly that can happen, and that's okay. That means you're paying attention. The radar is always out to how you can help, what you can do to be helping people in leadership.